I'd promise you this review was going to be short, but, you know, promises are prisons. Hi, I'm Phil, welcome to my channel where I talk about all the geeky pop culture I love. Today we're doing another Picard review, here every week for these Picard reviews. So hit that subscribe button if you're a Star Trek fan and you want to hear more reviews every single week from me. This week, episode 4, Absolute Candor. We are off, we are into space, finally, after 3 episodes of kind of set up. It feels like the adventure has finally begun now. I was unsure about how this was going to go, because in a serialized story, like Picard is, it could have been very serialized, or it could have tried to draw in, much like the first 3 episodes felt very serialized, or it could try and draw in more of an episodic themes and an episodic structure to it as well, sort of inside the larger structure of the narrative. And I think it's done the latter, and I think it works quite well. What I mean by that is this is an episode with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is a complete story in and of itself, separate from the main plot arc of the whole serialized story, but still playing into very many elements of that and still progressing that story, but while still being a self-contained story as well. And I don't know if we're going to get that all the way through the remaining episodes of Picard, but I think it was a good way to start this sort of second phase of the series. There was a really strong theme set up in this episode, set up right from the beginning flashback scene that we got as the pre-title sequence, that of promises and promises broken and promises made, and the weight of promises on people, specifically about Picard. Most of the promises in this episode relate to Picard, but it was kind of brought in different ways, different promises made to different groups, to different people, to individuals, and I like the way that they set that up in the beginning, with his promises to the Romulans on that particular group of Romulans on the settlement, and how, you know, it's brought in such a small little way, subtle way, with the fact that he kept a promise to bring a gift for the boy, and for was it chocolates or some kind of food gift for the other woman, and the other woman mentions that promises are like prisons. You know, they trap you into having to do something. And that was a theme that was played with throughout this episode in many ways, from those small little bits to quite literally galaxy changing events, and that have big implications for whole species of people. So I really like the fact that they picked this theme and they ran with it the whole episode and explored it in many different ways. That was really quite nice. Like I said, this feels like a very self-contained episode with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and in many ways it kind of feels a little bit like a traditional TNG episode, in the sense that, yeah, there's these other elements coming into play with it, and there's a larger story being told, sure, which is not very TNG, but the specific situation that Picard is dealing with in this episode kind of feels like something that could have been a latter TNG episode. He's bringing in his diplomacy skills, and they're not always working for him, which is quite nice. I like the way that they are taking all these tropes of Picard that we know and that we love, the diplomacy, the sort of kindness of him, and they are sort of subverting our expectations of it a little bit, and putting him in situations where that doesn't apply anymore. The universe has sort of moved on from Picard and his way of doing things, and it's not working in the way that it did during TNG. So we had this situation that's kind of, in a way, very similar to a TNG episode. He has to, you know, they have to get down to this planet. There's a tense situation between, you know, him and the locals, and he tries to diffuse that with diplomacy. But unlike a TNG episode where that might work eventually, we actually end up with a situation where that doesn't work, and Picard's famous diplomacy fails. And yet it feels so natural within the universe that the show has been establishing over the last couple of episodes, that it feels right. It feels absolutely true to the character that Picard would try and do things this way, and it feels absolutely right to the universe they've established that it absolutely fails. Okay, this is your spoiler warning, because I'm going to get into more spoilery things now. So when we got introduced to the little boy in the opening flashback, I completely missed the fact that he was going to be the Romulan that ends up joining the crew that we've seen in loads of these pictures. I know it probably was completely obvious, but for some reason I completely missed it. And so when that revelation happened later on, or when I clicked that was going to happen later on, and it was after he'd returned, it was quite a nice little revelation. And I like the way they've tied in his past there again. We've got another flashback, another expansion of what happened 14 years ago. Done much better than last week, I think, where we got a good scene, but it had the Mars attack again, which I didn't think was needed. Whereas this one, we just hear about the Mars attack and we see a different angle of it. We see what's happening to Picard at the time when that news hits, and it's, interesting to see. It's an angle we needed to see, I think. So we get that, and we get the setup for the kid joining the crew when he becomes an adult. It's all really good stuff, and I like the characters that they introduced there, the warrior nuns of Romulan society, which we've never heard of before, but up until now, one thing Star Trek has always sort of struggled with is all cultures seem to have a stereotype, and most of the people we've seen from those cultures, bar one or two, fit that stereotype. So, Romulans are a certain way, Vulcans are a certain way, etc. And I was thinking about this, and I think it's probably because, and this includes Starfleet as well, we pretty much just see the military, in most Star Trek iterations, we mostly see the military of various species. If you think about it, right from Cardassians, Klingons, Romulans, we predominantly, throughout most of the Star Trek series, see their military. Whereas here, we're seeing much more of the sort of civilian life. And yeah, we saw someone who was an ex-senator in this, but on the whole, we're seeing a much more variety of the species of Romulans. And I think that's really nice to see for a change. We're getting out of those stereotypes of, okay, Romulans have to be this. And at the beginning of the show, I did say I was a bit weirded out by how the Romulan on the Borg ship was acting, because it didn't seem very Romulan. And actually, I'm now coming around very much to the idea that, there isn't a type of Romulan that all Romulans should be. There should be a mix of different people, and this episode showed that quite well. I did think, though, that the nuns, while a good concept, and I liked the concept of their way of absolute candor. I mean, I wouldn't like to be in a room with them, but I don't need that much truth. But, as a concept, they're a great concept to play into a story. However, I don't think they really played into that whole candor thing enough to make it worthwhile it being there. I mean, it may come into play a bit more later. Maybe they're setting up for some stuff later. But in that episode itself, it didn't feel like it played much of a part other than an excuse for the boy to sort of say he had hurt feelings at the beginning. And after that, it didn't really feel like it played into the episode at all. So I can only assume that they're going to pay it off later on, and that they may well do that through Elnor being on the ship. Maybe that's going to come into play with his interactions with the rest of the crew. The Antique Bird of Prey gave us a nice little space battle, and I think each episode needs some action, and we got that in a couple of forms. We got a bit of hand-to-hand sort of fighting action on the ground, and then we also got the space battle, and this is the first real space battle other than the attack on Mars. If you don't count that, this is the first sort of space battle we've had of this iteration of Star Trek. So we're going to get to it eventually. I kind of feel like the Antique Bird of Prey was just thrown in there as fan service, but I suppose it does also kind of make sense in the structure of the universe and how, the Romulans kind of picking up what they can find, where they can find it to try and rebuild bits of society, individuals trying to use whatever tech they can get their hands on to exert a bit of power. It makes sense, I suppose, that they would find an old ship and make use of it. But it did kind of feel a bit like, okay, yeah, you've done your fan service now, great. One thing I do have to absolutely praise this episode for is the music, which for the first time I've really noticed in this episode. It's kind of been in the background a lot, and I haven't really picked up on it in the previous episodes. But this episode, there were several scenes where I was like, this music is really good, and it's really adding to the ambience of the scene. So I don't know who the composer is, but well done, because it's really worked well in this. I'm kind of flying about all over the place rather than going through the episode chronologically here, but going back to the flashback, there was the costume that Picard was wearing kind of threw me for a moment for several reasons, but mainly it felt a bit anachronistic. It didn't feel like it belonged in the era, and again, that may be a symptom of the fact that we generally see the military side of the universe. We see people in uniforms predominantly. We don't see that much of civilian life, even on Earth, even amongst humans. You know, even in their downtime, often on the ships, we often just see them in uniform. We don't see much civilian clothing, so maybe that's why it sticks out. But it seems so late 19th century, early 20th century that it kind of feels a bit out of place. Then again, Picard is very much a man of history. He loves history. He loves archaeology. There's no reason to think he wouldn't, enjoy the styles of the past. So maybe that's okay. But there's another angle to it, which I thought, I'm not sure how I feel about it. There's a kind of element of feeling like Starfleet are colonial powers. They certainly go in and try and encourage people to join them, and they found colonies in places. And the kind of garb he was wearing felt very colonial in a way. It kind of felt a bit like, someone, enjoying in India. Yeah, in India's, that's where I'm thinking of it. It's like, your British gentleman dressed for the Indian weather in, again, late 19th century British Empire type thing. It was that kind of outfit, and it just felt a bit strange in that situation. But maybe that was deliberate. Maybe there were thematic parallels they wanted to explore there in terms of whether or not Starfleet is a colonial power as opposed to just a peacekeeping force. The stuff on the Borg cube, again, we didn't get that much of it, and I think they're deliberately pacing this out, and we're not getting that much each time. But we are developing the relationship between Soji. I remembered her name this week. Yes, it's taken me 4 weeks, but I finally remembered her name. Soji. And the Romulan guy that I can't remember the name of. The Romulan guy. Seems to be developing their relationship a bit, and we're finding, a bit more about, I think we're kind of heading down a route of him actually falling for her, and then having a bit of a conflict of interest between his duty to this mysterious Romulan organization that's against simps and wants to destroy them all, and his newfound love for this synth person. I think we're going to go down that route, and I kind of like the fact that they're slowly building that. They rushed it a little bit with the whole, I think I'm falling in love with you, was it last week? But then, again, that probably wasn't genuine. I don't think he was falling in love with her at that point. That was him, playing the part of infiltrating her life. Whereas, I think he generally is going to be gradually falling in love with her. And then there's his relationship with his sister, which... is anybody else getting Jaime and Cersei Game of Thrones vibes there? Feels a little bit incestuous, but I don't know. Hopefully, I don't really want them to go down that route very much more. It seems to be mostly coming from her, so maybe that's just a creepy thing she does. Let's hope so. My review's a little bit scattered all over the place at the moment. I've got a cold, and my brain's not working properly, and I'm suddenly remembering all the other things I wanted to talk about in random orders. But the captain. We got some more holograms. So last time I was a little bit iffy on whether or not he has multiple holograms. He definitely has multiple holograms, and they all have different accents, and I kind of love it. I kind of love the fact that he gets to play all these characters, and I love the funny interactions that he has between them, and his relationship with them. I think there's some stuff to explore there, but there seems to be a lot of things that they're dropping in, little lines here and there about his past. We had the line, was it last week, about the fact that his previous Starfleet captain ended up with their brains all over the bulkhead or whatever, and this week there was another line about his past that they seem to be just dropping in, and I don't know if they're just dropping them in because they're leading somewhere, in which case fine, great, or if they're just kind of scattering these lines to go, ooh, let's make him all mysterious and give him this shady past. And if they're just doing that, it kind of feels a bit cheap. But if it leads somewhere in the end, it'll probably be okay. And if we get to explore these elements of his past, that's fine. I just don't want them to have just thrown it in there just for the sake of, hey, let's add this line in just to make him sound a bit more edgy. And then of course it had an amazing cliffhanger at the end. 7 of 9 beams aboard after being rescued by them. I can't wait for next episode now. This is the bit I've really been looking forward to. 7 of 9 appearing. I hope she isn't in it for just one episode. Hope she sticks around for a bit, because I'm really looking forward to seeing her interaction with Picard, where her story has gone since we last saw her on Voyager, and all of that stuff. I'm really looking forward to that. So roll on next week. Look, thank you for watching. This has been a bit of a scatterbrain review. I've had a bit of a cold over the last few days and I'm only still recovering. But thank you for watching. If you want to see more of my reviews, more Picard reviews coming every Friday, and Doctor Who reviews every Sunday evening as well, along with a lot of other pop culture content on this channel. So do subscribe, hit that bell button, like, share, all that jazz, and I will see you again next week. Bye.